Just let me know. So today we'll discuss about getting published, how to write a scientific manuscript. I think if you are a researcher or a faculty or research staff, you want to get published and you want to be productive. If you are a student as well, I usually I go for both outcomes. One, sometimes you have assignments, you have thesis, and then you want to hit the two birds with one stone. So you want to work towards your assignment at the same time you want to publish. So it's always good. You can add something to your curriculum vitae and refer back to it whenever you want to advance in your career. So in today's presentation, at the end of the presentation, I hope everybody will be able to identify the sections needed when writing a scientific paper. I hope everybody will be able to describe the components of each section of a scientific paper and discuss the characteristics of a publishable scientific paper and determine how to properly format a research manuscript. So the following are characteristics of a publishable paper. One, it has to be a good paper is a clear, coherent, focused, and well-argued document that uses unambiguous language. This is taken from an article that was published by Krit Nath, is a professor. And so this researcher described a good scientific paper as a clear, coherent, focused, and well-argued document that uses unambiguous language. So a publishable manuscript has to be clear. Sections have to have a clear connection. It has to be coherent. It has to be focused on a given topic. So we should not include a lot of topics, a lot of end points in a manuscript. We have to focus on a given topic. And we have to, it has to be well-argued. We'll look at what we mean by well-argued document as we look at the introduction and the remaining sections of the manuscript. So the topics and presentations are novel. So for a manuscript to be considered a good manuscript and a publishable manuscript, the topic and the presentation have to be novel. When we say novel, it has to be kind of new in the field. If we are repeating a topic that has been well researched, and then we have to be able to convince what our manuscript actually adds into the existing literature. And most of the time, our article has to have a novel topic, a topic that's not like common, that's not common or well researched. And the research fills a significant gap in the scientific knowledge in the field, especially as we look at the introduction section of a manuscript. We have to describe what significant gap in the scientific knowledge our research is going to fill. So one has to describe about the significance gap in scientific knowledge. And the research paper has internal and external validity. When we say internal validity, we mean the study by itself is free of confounding and biases. And when we talk about external validity, we mean the study findings can be generalized to a different population than the study participant or population. And And getting things right the first time improve the chance of acceptance. So once you write your scientific paper, at some point you will decide to submit to journals for publication. And when you want to submit your article to scientific journals, first make sure that you have taken care of everything. Make sure that there are no typos, and the writing is consistent. Try to use the same font throughout. Try to use the same kind of lining. If you use multiple line in one page and um, article with closed kind of alignment in different pages, that would distract the reviewers and the editors. So make sure you are consistent in formatting and the likes. So try to make sure the first impression of your manuscript will be good. For that, read your article several times. Once you have completed the article, everybody who has been on the manuscript have contributed and have looked at it. And then especially the last time when you want to submit, go on the article again and try to take your time and make sure that everything is okay. So when writing a manuscript, first read the target journal's instructions to the author. The instructions to the author usually contain detailed instructions such as the abstract word count. Usually the abstract word count is limited to 250 words. And we have written our manuscript, and there are a lot of results, impressive results that we want to include in our manuscript. But there is almost always, there is a word count limitation on abstract from the potential journals. So try to read the journal's instruction to the author and make sure that you don't even go a single word above the abstract word count. Otherwise, they might turn it back to you, and then you have to do everything again. And so make sure you have you adhere to the requirement about the word count for the abstract. And then the main article word count. Again, probably you have written your article and let's say 6,000 or 7,000 word count is, and for most journals they specify the allowed word counts, and especially in high impact journals, the word counts are very small, like 3,000, 4,000, a maximum 4,000 and the likes. So make sure you have read the journal's instruction to the author and adhere to the word counts. Try to cut out redundant or unnecessary information, and you can use different resources to meet that, but also you can ask your collaborators or co-authors to help you reduce the word counts. And the reference style is another area where journal instruction has details or specific requirement. They sometimes journals have their own style and they want you to follow the same style. And otherwise, they might tell you to restyle it. And they have, so for example, when we talk about the reference style, those are how to format the article authors that you have cited in text citation as well as a reference. They specify the number of authors that you have to include in the list of authors, and when or where to use the ETL or the one that stands for additional colleagues. So some specify you have to include the first 5 authors. Others say you have to include the first 7 authors and then use et al. And the likes. So you have to follow the, if you abbreviate the journal article where the article that you have cited have been published if you abbreviate that in one in a reference, make sure you also abbreviate in the other. Try to be consistent. The journal's instruction to the author also include detailed required checklists. So for example, the PRISMA checklist for observational studies and the likes. So make sure you read the journal's instruction to the author. And they have different accepted manuscript outlines. JAMA has its own, New England Journal of Medicine has its own, and other journals have their own outlines. So for example, some start with background, and then methodology, setting, and the results section, conclusion, and the abstract, and then introduction, methodology and materials, a result, a discussion, references, tables and figures, and the likes. Others might start with background instead of objective, while others start with objective. So that is what we mean by the accepted manuscript outline. So try to read the journal's instructions. It saves you time later on when you are submitting your manuscript for publication. Some additional instructions that are included in the journal and instruction to the authors are maximum number of tables and figures and accepted format especially for figures. The scope of the journal might also help avoid wasting of time. So when we say scope of journals, so for example, if you are writing a clinical trial and the journal is about nutrition, it's unlikely that the journal will consider your manuscript, even though it's a very novel and impactful article or research that you have conducted. Based on the journal scope, they might pass you to another one, maybe. So in order to avoid wasting your time, read also the journal scopes, what they publish. Some journals, for example, just publish reviews or meta-analysis, while others publish only original articles. So let's look at what factors determine an article's or manuscript's acceptance. The acceptance for publication is determined by novelty of the evidence, which I've mentioned on the previous slide, which means how new the information is, how original it is, and the quality of the research. So for example, if we compare a randomized clinical trials to observational study, a randomized clinical trial is by default is considered a better quality. And then when we look at the randomized clinical trials, and then we can become very specific about have the randomization scheme been well described, have the researcher described about the dropout and the analysis and the likes. So the quality of the research is one of the determining factors for a manuscript to be published. And the other is clarity of the manuscript. Try to be very clear and be intentional and know that the reviewers as well as the editors want to follow you, and so try to lead the readers in your manuscript. Existing literature on the topic is existing literature on the topic is another determining factor for whether an article can be published. If there are a lot of evidence already on the same topic, and then you are writing a manuscript, it has to be, you have to convince why your article is relevant. So if there are a lot of articles, it's less likely that yours can be published, but you can still try and convince why your article is published. What does your article add? What does your research add, and on the top of the existing literature? And gap in the evidence that the research fills. I have mentioned about this in the previous slide as well. So this is also very important. And potential interest to the readers. Just like I said, if try to read the scope of the journal and make sure you submit your article to the right journal. And the reverse recommendation and how persuasive the author's response are. So once you submit your article into a scientific journal, it's likely that 2 or more reviewers, usually invited peer reviewers, would be assigned to read your article, your research, and provide feedback. And usually the reviewers provide a lot of reviews and corrections, and they might ask you to add or revise your analysis and the likes. And so the best option is usually go ahead and do what they have asked you to do, and try to resolve the issue that way. And in some situations, you might not be able to do what they have requested because of the limitation that you might have. So in that situation, try to be persuasive. Sometimes you have your own choices and you don't want to change based on the reverse request. In that situation, try to back your argument, your response with some existing evidence. For example, if some other articles have been used or research have used the same method and they have been published in very prestigious journals, you can cite those in your response to the reverse comments. That might help you to persuade the reviewers and the editors. And compliance to the guideline is one of the important factors that might determine whether your article can be published in a given journal. And the other one is consistency. When we say consistency, it's a lot of things. One is a formatting kind of consistency. You have to use the same font type and font size, the same kind of indentations in the paragraph formats and the likes. If you use the whole phrases or word in some parts of the article and use an abbreviation in another part of the article, these are called inconsistency. So try to be consistent throughout. We'll see, like when we talk about tables and the likes, what consistency refers to. So the general sections of a manuscript are title and authors. These usually appear on the first page of the manuscript. The abstract, this usually appears on the second page. In addition to the title and authors, there are also author affiliations, and lists of authors are there. And the corresponding author and the contact information of the corresponding author is other information that are included in the first page of the manuscript. The other one is the abstract. It has its own outline. We'll see it in the next slides. The introduction, the methodology, statistical analysis, results, discussion, author contributions and conflicts of interest and funding, references and tables and figures. So these are the general research manuscript outline, but it could be different based on the potential journal that you're considering to submit your article to. But generally they follow this kind of outline. In some journals, they might want you to put the methodology at the end. So including the statistical analysis. So it's going to be introduction followed by results, discussion, and the likes. For example, in oncotarget and the likes. A title and authors. The title should be informative and commonly include the information about the participant and the study design. For example, one example can be the effect of dexamethasone on COVID-19 patients with type 2 diabetes in the COVID-19 control study, a randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial. So, and in this title, we have mentioned the exposure or the treatment and the participant and their characteristics. They are COVID-19 patients with type 2 diabetes. And it's likely that in this hypothetical study, the participants, COVID-19 patients with type 2 diabetes were given dexamethasone, and some of the participants were given a placebo, and it's a randomized clinical trial. So our study has to include a very descriptive, informative title, and we also include about the participant, about the study design, and sometimes the researchers also include the sample size and the likes. The authors should be those who have made significant contribution to the research and should verify the accuracy of the manuscript and approve the final manuscript before they are included as co-authors. So the co-authors should be those who have contributed significantly to the manuscript. They should have contributed substantially to the manuscript. They should have read the manuscript and approved it for publication and the likes. Co-authors order is usually decided based on their consensus agreement or by the corresponding author according to the level of their contribution. The abstract section. So this is the section that showcases your study. So in most journals, the first section that a reader will be able to read, as well as the reviewers and editors first pay attention to and judge about your manuscript is based on the abstract. So the abstract makes the first impression about your work. And so pay a lot of attention and make sure that it's accurate and reflects your manuscript. So describe the following in your abstract: the main objective of the study. So you can say the objective of the study is to examine or investigate the impact of, for example, in the previous slide, the dexamethasone on COVID-19 patients with type 2 diabetes. So you describe your objective or the aim of your study concisely in a single sentence. And so the main objective of the study methodology, this should describe the study design, whether it is clinical trial, whether it is cohorts, case control study, cross-sectional study, or whether it is a case series or case report. The sample size, how many participants have been included, and how the sample size was decided, but you can be detailed in the later section of your manuscript. So try to mention the sample size, a brief description of the participant. So in terms of whether like the age of the participant, the characteristics of the participant, are they healthy participant, are they patients like COVID-19 patients and the likes. So a brief description of the participant is very important. The age of participant, the average age of participant, gender composition and the likes. The exposure or treatment and outcome and their method of measurements. This is also very important. So the information that you provide in the methodology section in the abstract tells or shows the validity of your study to the reviewers, the editors, and your readers. Brief description of the statistical analysis is also important. So it's part of whether your study is valid or not based on what type of statistical analysis you have used, have you adjusted for covariates and the likes. And the summary results or finding of the study. This should include both qualitative and quantitative summary of the study. Just like we said, this showcases your whole study. It's a showcase for your whole study. You have to make sure that you include evidence that convinces the readers as well as those who are in making decisions, in the position of making decision about whether your article has to be published or not, to have the information right up front. So you have to include the qualitative, which means the reports, the measures of association, or the relationship or differences between the compared groups, and also briefly describe in a qualitative manner. And make sure you identify the reference group when you compare groups. And at the end of the abstract includes the conclusion. This is a takeaway message of the study, and it tells how impactful your article is to the field. So make sure you make a conclusion that's based on the finding and based on and is supported with the data that you use for your analysis. So for example, if you are you conducted observational study and you didn't do a clinical trial, but your conclusion is a kind of causal kind of conclusion, that indicates your conclusion is not backed by the data or the evidence. So make sure that your conclusion is supported by your findings. So in the abstract, do not include citations or references, figures or tables in the abstract. Sometimes if your article or research work is just for presentation in a workshop, the only thing that you might have is the abstract. So in this situation, you might include figures and tables. But in article that you plan to publish, you cannot include citations and figures in the abstract. In the introduction section, which is usually the second section to the abstract, describe the following. So you have to describe the current state of the disease or the health condition, why the current study is relevant. So what is the prevalence of the condition in the population, and what is the healthcare cost related with the disease? And make sure you cite some evidences or references about your statements. And why is the current study relevant? What can it resolve? What can does it add any helpful information or knowledge, improve the knowledge about the condition, or does it introduce some new treatment or so? Try to describe what the current study adds as a solution to the problem. Include the current literature, cite previous studies that have been conducted. So make sure that you read and cite and make a reference to previous studies so that people have perspective. So they can look at your study in the context of existing literature. Briefly summarize the existing knowledge about the topic. Briefly summarize the existing knowledge and try to portray where a gap exists in the current literature or knowledge, and then you will show how your study is going to fill that gap. So identify a gap in evidence that your study aims to fill. Describe the research hypothesis and aim of the study. So usually these are the main things that you have to include in your introduction. Try not to include the result of your current study. I review for clinical and scientific journals very frequently, and sometimes I see in a very well conducted research, they also include their result in the introduction. In the introduction, usually the results are not included. The results are reserved into the results section of your study. So don't include your result in the introduction section. In the introduction section, you have to convince, you have to write about the existing knowledge and summarize what has been already done and what is missing or what is the gap and how is your study going to fill that gap. And generally at the end, you will describe the aim of your study and also what is your hypothesis. So the research hypothesis that we mentioned here is the testable statement about the relationship between the variable that you want to investigate. The methodology section, sometimes it's written as methods and materials, other times methods. In this section, you describe the study participant. That can be humans, animals, or it can be also devices. So describe in detail so that people will understand whom the study was conducted on. And also describe about the recruitment, how were the participant is recruited. Where are they recruited from? For example, if your study participants are hospital based, the controls also need to be from the same kind of hospital. And so describe about the recruitments that have been conducted. I describe about the inclusion and exclusion criteria. This is very relevant. Try to, in many studies, especially if they are funded, the NIH and other funders recommend that you include women and minorities and the likes. And so in your study, describe your inclusion and exclusion criteria and make sure that there is no like bias in your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And also like if you only include male or females, and then your conclusion will be limited by the scope of your study. So make sure your findings can be generalized and has external validity. And the procedures for data collection, what did you use for data collection? Did you use interview? Did you use in-depth kind of survey? Or did you use questionnaire? Did you use electronic data collection? Did you use electronic medical record? Describe those in detail. And how the missing data were addressed or handled. Almost in every study, there are some percentage of the participants on whom the data are missing. And usually, if the number of participants on whom the data are missing is very small, they might not have that much impact. But if the missing data constitute a large proportion of the study's participant, it can influence the outcome of the study. So describe how you handle the missing data. So there are several ways that missing data can be handled. If it is a continuous data, sometimes replacing the missing values with the average, or based on whether the missingness is missing at random and the likes. Different ways and mechanisms can be used for replacing the missing data, or sometimes the participants with missing data are excluded from the study. But that would be determined based on whether you have enough study participants. And there are also automatic missing data handling mechanisms. Methodology section continued. So I describe the storage of the data. For example, if samples are being collected, blood samples are being collected, urine samples are being collected, how were they collected and how did you store the data? How were they stored? What degree Fahrenheit were they stored at under? So describe the situation so that this will help us see whether your study is valid and the findings are supported by a rigorous research. Describe about the assays, including the preparation and storage procedure. Describe about the study, exposure, and treatment. These are the section that is very, very important. So you have to describe in detail about the exposure and treatment. So in cohort studies or observational studies, the exposures are usually taken on by the participant and they are not assigned by the researcher. In clinical trial, randomized clinical trials, they are assigned by the researcher. So you have to describe about the exposure and treatment. How were they collected? How were the information collected? Did you assign the treatment or exposure yourself? And how did you assign them? What did you use? So you have to describe about those in your description of the exposure and treatment. How did you assign them if this is a randomized clinical trial? We'll also see in detail about clinical trials in next slides. So describe about the amount or how they are measured and the likes. And the primary and secondary outcomes, this is another very important point or topic in your methodology or your entire research. And you have to describe and define the primary outcome and secondary outcome. Make sure you don't include several outcomes in your study. Otherwise, there would be too much information for people to handle. And you don't want to do that. You want them to focus on your main outcome and exposure. If you have a lot of outcomes, try to separate them into different papers. So that means without having to bother to do like several research, you can split your research into multiple research and publish. And so its acceptance will be reduced as you include several outcome in the same study. Try to be specific. And define the outcome in a well-described format. And the covariates or the potential confounding variables also describe those. For example, when we say age, we can use as age as a continuous variable. We can also categorize age based on like 5 years interval and the likes. We can also categorize it greater than or equal to 65 and the likes. And so make sure you describe how the covariates have been collected in your research and describe the additional collected data. And the other information that you need to add into your methodology that's usually asked is ethical consideration. Make sure your study have been approved by the IRB or it has been considered exempt, and include that information. Sometimes the journals require you to include the IRB approval number. Also state informed consent, how the participants were informed about the study and consent have been obtained. For clinical trials, make sure to include the following: randomization procedure in detail, how randomization were conducted. Did you use a lottery kind of randomization where you just add all the participants into a hat and randomly pick one and assign them to the treatment arm, another to the control arm, or whether you have used a random number generation, and automatic assignment of participant into the treatment arm and the control arm. So describe in detail the randomization procedure, and describe the implementation of masking, blinding, or the treatment arm. So when we say masking or blinding, we mean about making the investigator and the participant unaware of the type of treatment that is provided. So when we conduct randomized clinical trial, we have the treatment medication and we have the placebo. Both the placebo and the treatment medication look alike, so they are mostly indistinguishable. And so we make sure the investigator and the participant do not know which one is the treatment, the intervention drug, and the placebo drug, so that their response will not be influenced by the knowledge of about whether they are taking the randomized drug or the placebo. And for the investigator also, to avoid biases about the interpretation of the result, we mask them. So a given person, sometimes like the statistician, assigns the participant into the treatment and the placebo arm. And then once the study has been concluded, probably the investigators will be unblinded or unmasked for the interpretation purposes and the likes. So describe about masking and blinding in detail. Describe about the treatment, their dosage, the frequencies, how many times daily they have been given, and for what duration. Is that for a month, for 6 months, or a year or longer? And describe about the dropout rate. So these are very relevant information that you always need in your clinical trials manuscript. The randomization scheme, the implementation of masking and blinding, make sure to describe those, and make sure to describe about the dropout rate. So how many of the randomized participants eventually completed your study? And how are you going to conduct the analysis? We'll describe about that in next slides. So for clinical trials include the analysis plan, such as whether you used intention to treat analysis. So an intention to treat analysis or randomized participant will be analyzed regardless of whether they dropped out of the study or whether they were compliant or not. So that's called intention to treat analysis. The other type of analysis is called per protocol analysis. Only those who comply with the study protocol and complete the study are analyzed. I prefer the second, per protocol analysis, because you don't just analyze data on participants who have not adhered to the guideline at the beginning of the study. But you can use whichever you like, or based on the target journal recommendation. And describe the equipoise or uncertainty and the benefit of the investigation drug or treatment. This means to justify your research, your clinical trial, there has to be some form of uncertainty whether the drug, the investigational drug is beneficial or not. So there has to be equipoise or uncertainty in the benefit of the investigational drug. And that's why you conduct your research to show whether it is beneficial or not. The statistical analysis section, this is also one of the major important section of the manuscript. It usually requires the involvement of biostatistician or statistician. It has to be detailed and descriptive, and usually it includes so a description. The description of the statistical analysis section should enable replication and reproduction of your study. So if the reviewers or editors or somebody else is given your data, they have to be able to replicate your result based on the description that you included in your statistical analysis section. So make sure the description is complete. And the statistical thesis for summary characteristics of the study participants. This is also one of the common statistical analysis that you have to include in your study. So before I can see some people are already leaving. So if you have to go, please make sure that you leave me your name and the email address so that I'll be able to send you some presentation evaluation survey, which takes about 2 minutes. Send me in a text. Thank you. In the statistical analysis section, we also describe the main analysis, include the main analysis description. This should answer the research question or a test hypothesis. Describe the method used, such as t-test, ANOVA, chi-square test, z-test, linear regression, logistic regression, Poisson regression, the adjusted covariates, and the likes. The statistical analysis section should also describe the adjustment for covariates and the selection of covariates. So describe how you decided which covariate to adjust in your research. Usually that is based on either the literature. So what covariate have previous research have adjusted for? So based on the covariate that have been adjusted for in the literature, you might decide to include those covariates in your research as well. Besides that, there are automatic covariate selection criteria, such as forward, backward, stepwise selection criteria. In this case, in the forward one, you will enter covariates or participant characteristics or study characteristics one by one into the model, and keep the covariates that are significant at a given critical value, usually 0.05, or it can be less stringent than that, like 0.02 or 1 or something. And the backward one, you include all the covariates that you want to consider to include in your analysis, and then keep those that meet certain criteria, such as archaic information criteria, which tells whether the more saturated models are better than crude models or less saturated models. And the stepwise selection criteria is similar to the backward one. And in your statistical analysis section, also describe the sample size estimation method. Make sure you include the data. The data are very usually needed. So include the effect size, the assumed statistical power, the critical alpha value, and if this cohort study, the duration, and the standard deviation are relevant information that can help reviewers or readers to replicate your study, especially for sample size. If you include all the relevant information, any reader can replicate your study and confirm the sample size is accurate. So include as many information for sample size estimation, and include you include the effect size, standard deviation, power, and significance levels used. Clearly describe the exposure and outcome. So this is a repetition of the methodology section. So just make it as brief as possible in the statistical analysis section. But make sure that people can understand the direction of association. Make sure to put the exposure first and then the outcome. And state the critical alpha level that's used for making study conclusion. Usually the alpha level that are used are 0.05. But if you want to be very strict, you might use 0.01. In genetics studies, it can be very small, like 10 raised to -6 or something. State the compare groups clearly. State the reference group and the comparison group. And finally, mention the statistical software that you use for the analysis, whether it is R, SAS, SPSS, Stata, Python, Julia, or whichever statistical software that you use. State in the at the end of the statistical analysis section. In the results section, include the summary of the following: the summary study participant characteristics, the age of the participant, gender. So put the summary characteristics of the study participant, and make sure to include the main findings and be concise. Don't repeat everything that is also reported in the tables and figures, but try to provide a very concise summary of the main findings. So this is a section that people also pay a lot of attention to. And make sure you don't repeat yourself. Don't be redundant. And be consistent in terms of, like, when you report the measures of association in terms of spaces, capitalization, and the likes, be consistent. Include graphs and tables when possible, and these are usually, when you submit your article, they are always kept behind at the end of the manuscript. But when they are published, they usually appear next to the report in the results section. If the study is a follow-up study, summarize the follow-up period. So summarize, describe the average months of follow-up or years of follow-up. Define abbreviations at the end of at the first time when they are used in the whole study as well as in the results section. Try to describe abbreviations when they are used first. Consistency is always required. I repeat myself, but this is very relevant. If you are not consistent in terms of like formats, capitalizations, abbreviations, and the likes, they think that you don't pay attention to the detail. That means they doubt the validity of your research. So, for example, it is discouraged to use odds ratio with a space in one section. Like here, we have a space between the equal sign and the odds ratio, and again a space here, again between the number and the parentheses, and here. And then in the next section, you are using odds ratio with no space between the odds ratio and the numbers, between the numbers and the parentheses and the likes. So these are examples of inconsistencies, but it can come in and might reflect in many ways. So, and the table section include, the table should follow these suggestions. It should be understood on their own without having to look for information somewhere else in the manuscript. So include as many as annotation as possible so that people who read your table can easily understand your table without having to refer back to the manuscript, main manuscript or results section. Include footnote, and this should be included to explain abbreviations and scientific terms, the models, whether it's crude, the adjusted models, and the sequence of adjustment and the likes, and how you calculated the p-values, the method that was used, or whether you use logistic regression, linear regression, or survival. So you describe your method in the footnote of your tables. And also describe the adjusted variables. The table title should help understand the summary result in the table. we'll see an example of good table and an example of a poorly designed table in the next slides. Identify. So the title should help understand the contents that is in the table. Identify the reference group in a clear manner. Report as many relevant results as possible in the table. Reporting only the p-values in the results section is not enough. So this is also true in the abstract. Try to include relevant information, relevant quantitative findings in the abstract beside the p-value. Sometimes when I review manuscripts, some researchers only include the p-values and you don't have any other information. And the p-value by itself is not enough. So in the figure section, again, depict a clear picture of the result. Should be labeled properly. And figures should have legends and brief explanations as footnotes. And the figure legends should help the reader understand the figure without having to look for additional information somewhere else in the manuscript. Some journals are particular about the figure format, such as whether it has to be PNG, JPEG, TIFF, SVG, or PostScript, PDF, or the likes. So make sure you have read the format of the picture, the figure that's acceptable by the potential journal that you are considering. And make sure to submit figures in the requested format. So some formats have poor resolution and might blur your figure. And so you can experiment with the format if the journals do not have any specific requirements. So let's have a look at examples of a well-designed table. So in this table, we have one line at the top and another line below the title. And then we have one internal line and one line at the end. And also we separate the two types of analysis, or the two models, the univariate model and multivariate model. And we have described the, as you see, table X, univariate analysis and multivariate analysis of the association of SN, X, 10, and PTGDS expression with cervical cancer mortality. So this is on the analysis of these two genes in association with cervical cancer mortality. So this is informative in terms of the title. So we know what is included in here. And we have Hadar ratio here, a 95% confidence interval, the p-values and the likes. And then the variables are listed on the left-hand side. And for tumor grade, we have the reference group, grade 1 and 2 reference, and they do not have Hadar ratios and confidence intervals reported for. And then this is the category of interest. So this is the Hadar ratio as compared to tumor grade 1 and 2. So we know that this is a reference group and this is the category of interest. And so the reference group is well known here. And then for SNX, 10, and PTGDS, these are genes related with cervical cancer in this study. We have only the Hadar ratios. This is because they are continuous in the expression of these genes, and they are continuous variables. And the Hadar ratios are for every unit increase in the expression. So in this table, we have footnote which help us understand what is the difference between the univariate analysis and multivariate analysis. The multivariate models were adjusted for age, race, body mass index, and parity. That means the number of pregnancies. And then The SNX 10 and PTDS are the results are for every unit increase. And abbreviations, the reference, we have abbreviations. Sorting, and the prostaglandin D2 synthase gene. So we have abbreviations. Those information help us understand the table without having to go back to the article to understand what the table is about. This is another table of the same information, which is poorly designed, in my opinion. So the title is not as informative as the previous one, and we don't have information about which one is the reference group. There are a lot of lines in the table, which is discouraged in most journals, and we don't have footnote that describes about what the variables are about, and what do the p-values stand for, how, so what form or type of data are the two genes and the likes. So this is a less informative kind of table, and we consider this as a poor table. When I review articles submitted to journals for publication, I usually come across tables that are even less informative or less or more poorly designed than this one. Again, in figures, we said you have to include figure legends in order to make the reader understand it. So this is, for example, a histogram of COVID-19, but there is less information about what this is. Like, it looks a good figure. Maybe some might say it's not a good figure, but there is no enough information. This is a mortality rate by sex of COVID-19. But in the next figure, we have more information in title. It's on COVID-19 mortality rate per 100 cases by sex. Data are hypothetical, and the different rates could vary over time, or could be over time or other characteristics. So this information is at least helpful. So there is a labeling, the title, a labeling on the x-axis, and the remainder are almost the same. So make sure you include as much information in the figure legend so that people can find it easy to understand the figure. And make also sure your figure is as clear as possible. And make sure it's not blurred, it's not manipulated or something. So there are different types of plot that you can use, and make sure to consider the right one, to pick a right one. For continuous data, we might use histogram, box or whisker plot, line plot, scatter plot. And for categorical data, you might want to consider bar plot or pie chart. So this is an example of a line plot on the association between BMI and blood glucose level by sex. So the two lines are by whether it is female or male. And the next one is the box and a whisker plot. So we have one continuous variable, and on x-axis we have a categorical variable. So gender here, and rate of COVID-19 cases in every rate of mortality rate of COVID-19 cases per 100 infected cases. So as you see, there is a difference by gender, but this figure is less informative. And then we have another plot, which is a scatter plot between BMI and blood glucose level, again by gender. And for a categorical variable, we can display them using pie chart like here. You can use this to describe the characteristic of study participant. The last section in the manuscript is the discussion section, and this section should include, especially in the first paragraph, provide a concise qualitative summary of the findings. So make sure you don't include the numbers here or the quantitative findings from your study, because it would be a repetition if you include the result in the results section and in the discussion section. So try to avoid numbers in the discussion section. You might include results or numeric results from previous studies or the literature, but try to be reserved about it. In the following section of the paragraph, so next to the main findings of your study, describe the following. Compare your findings with the literature and describe the other studies that support your findings, and discuss if there are any discrepancy between your findings and previous studies. And if there are discrepancies, try to explain and use as many information that as you have to describe and clear why there are discrepancies. And in clinical studies, explain the mechanism of the relationship between or of the association between the exposure and the outcome variable. So usually you use one brief paragraph about the mechanism of relationship between the exposure and outcome, and describe the limitation and strengths of your study. These are usually required. What are the limitations of your study? Are the limitations specific to your study, or are they limitations which are characteristics of the study design or the existing knowledge or something? Sometimes we are unable to collect all the data that we need to include in our data, so there are residual confounding. So you might list about that. If your data collection methodology was less accurate, or there might be measurement errors, you might want to mention those in this section. Also, make sure you highlight the strengths of your study so that people can buy your article and would like to read it. So you have to specify 10 strengths of your studies. The order in which the limitation and strengths appear, those are personal choices. Sometimes people put the limitation first and then the strengths. Other time people put the strengths first and then the limitation, but they appear usually in about the same paragraph. And explain what procedures were performed to reduce the impact of limitations, if possible. And summarize the health implications of your finding. What is the implications of your finding? What does it add to the existing knowledge? Describe the key takeaway from the study without exaggerating the findings and based on your data. And add conclusions. So the conclusion in the discussion section should also match the conclusion in the abstract section. So author contribution, conflict of interest, and funding are additional information that usually journal articles require you to add. In the author contribution, you mention about who conceived the study, who proposed the study, who drafted the first manuscript, who conducted the statistical analysis, using the abbreviation of names of the authors or the co-authors and the likes, and who approved the final articles and the likes. So brief description of the author's contribution is important. Another almost always required section is the conflict of interest section. This is brief, and this is to make sure that your findings or your interpretation were not influenced by a funding agency or industry, and make sure you include if there is any conflict of interest. If you are using, say for example, you are using a drug that's manufactured by a pharmaceutical company, and the pharmaceutical company funded your study, there is an apparent conflict of interest. In that situation, you have to tell that the company has funded your research, but you might say the company has not been involved in the collection of data and the analysis of the data or interpretation of the result and the likes. But make sure you are upfront about this information. Another one is the funding information. This is to acknowledge the funding agency for their contribution and funding of the study. And also this can help in understanding whether the funding agency might have influenced your conclusion and the likes. So the next section is the reference section. Use the reference manager such as EndNote, Medline, and the likes to prepare the reference according to the target journal instruction. Adhere to the reference style that is recommended by the journal, the potential journal. We will be discussing about reference using reference managers in our next presentation. Another important factor to consider when after you have written your manuscript and have decided to submit to a journal, usually how to select the journals to submit your articles to can be determined by the journal impact factor. The journal impact factor is a measure of the average number of times an average article in the journal was cited or is cited each year. So it is calculated as the total citation in a given year divided by the number of articles published in the journal in the 2 previous years. So the journal impact factor is a very informative information, and you don't want to publish your manuscript in just some online, blog space. You just want to publish your research in a very reputable journal, which is peer-reviewed, and your article is, vetted by editors. And so it makes an influence, it makes an impact in public health or clinical research. So make sure to select the journal based on the impact factor. So the higher the impact factor, the higher the quality of the journal is. So the impact factor is the measure of the scientific impact of articles published in the journal. So as the impact factor of journal increases, the acceptance rate decreases. So many reputable journals have acceptance rate as low as 50% to 20%. So that means out of 100 articles submitted to the journals, only 15 or 20 are accepted. So that means based on the quality of your research, you have a ballpoint estimate of whether your article is favorable to the given journal based on its impact factor. If you are aiming for, say, for example, JAMA or New England Journal of Medicine, which have high impact factors, or Nature or Cell, and the quality of your research is low, and then you are wasting your time and wasting the reviewers and editors' time. So make sure you pick the journal, target journal that is that aligns well with the quality and the scope of your research. So with that, we conclude. If you have any question, you're welcome. So if you raise your hand, I can't see. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a lot of information.
Yeah, I know it's a lot of information, but you can, once you start writing, it goes. Like you take a steps, you don't write everything in one day.
And after got a rejection from a review, and we got experience.
Absolutely, yeah. Even if your article is rejected, you go back and make those amendments, and then sometimes they give you a chance to resubmit, and so you go back and resubmit, addressing the comment that there is, or you might consider another journal after making the improvements. All right, thank you very much. I will
Thank you.
Yeah, I will email you a survey about what do you want to be different in the presentation and how can we improve in the future. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. That was a lot of information. It was really well done.
It is. Yeah, I have recorded it, and I can share the record with you so that you can go back to it and look at it.
And what about the slides? Do you share your slides?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you. That would be great.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, my friends.
See you soon.
See you.
See you, Trish.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.